We're starting today with a question that comes from Ale Perez Gon. And they ask, I can't hear without subtitles. Hello, everyone. I am here because I feel so frustrated. I've been trying to improve my English comprehension for a long time, around 2 years, by watching series, movies, social media, etc. When I use closed captions, subtitles, I can understand almost everything, like 90%. But when I try to watch something without subtitles, I am able to get maybe 30 or 40% depending on the content. I've also tried listening to podcasts, but I can barely understand a little and get lost really easily. This is very frustrating for me because I've spent so much time trying to improve this language. Does anybody else have the same problem? I would appreciate any advice from you guys. Thank you.
Yes, very common problem. The ability to hear is very challenging because it's not just about knowing the words or knowing the grammar, it's about processing it very, very quickly. Being able to hear the sounds and then process it into the language automatically. It's something that you don't really have time to think about. So I actually went through this exact same thing. I was understanding things almost perfectly with subtitles, but if I turned them off, I had difficulty listening. And so there are a lot of different activities that you can do, but the immediate answer is turn off the subtitles. So you really got to spend a lot of time listening to the language without subtitles in order to break through that. There's this thing we call the listening reading gap, where, as you described, you've got basically 99% comprehension while reading and 30% comprehension while listening. And that's pretty normal, but you got to catch that up. And it takes practice to actually catch it up. So it takes practice, it takes time, and it is just as hard as the entire process of reading, because you're really focusing on trying to get all of the language into your subconscious so you can process it immediately. So what I would recommend to you is to spend a lot of time listening, but it sounds like you're already starting to do that. But I would encourage you to focus on doing some more intensive listening, and that means actually spending time re-listening to sentences to try and understand them. Because if you are able to read them, it means you actually know all the words and grammar. It's just that your brain isn't processing it fast enough, either the sounds or the language. So if you actually take the time to repeat the sentences a couple times, you'll give your brain the opportunity and the time to process it and to understand it. And the more you practice with that, the more your brain gets that opportunity to really make those connections, it will improve. So one thing that I do is intensive listening. I will blur out the subtitles on Language Reactor, and I will play it sentence by sentence. And if I can't understand it on the first try, I'll re-listen to it a couple times, and then I'll check the subtitle to see, did I hear this correctly? I'm at the point now where the number of sentences that I hear correctly on the first try is much, much larger than the ones that I need to re-listen to. So I just watch through, and when I hear something that I couldn't understand on the first try, I'll re-listen to it a couple times, and then I'll check the subtitle. And so it's a slow process of going through, but it allows you to get in those repetitions to really understand and make sense of the sounds of the language. So given that you've been doing some listening and it hasn't really benefited you, I would recommend doing the intensive listening and generally just turn off the subtitles entirely. Another thing that you can do is there are some apps that allow you to loop things. So if you are listening to a podcast, if you can download the podcast and get it into the app, you can listen to it. And when you hear something that you don't understand, you can put it on a loop and then just listen to it, 10, 15, 20 times to give yourself the opportunity to understand it. And then once you either understand it or decide to give up, you just move on. So there's lots of different activities that you can do to improve your listening, but you really got to focus in on that specific skill. So you don't need to worry about vocabulary. You don't need to worry about reading. You really need to just focus all of your attention on listening in order to bridge that gap to reading.
It's also worth mentioning that even natives don't hear everything. It's like not even like there's actually we miss more than we think in pretty much everything because we are so good at knowing when it's not relevant or inferring things or hearing something different that's close enough. But as a language learner, you can often feel like you're missing more than you should be, despite you actually being pretty close to where you could be, especially if it's something that's just a throwaway line or in the background, or there's poor audio mixing or whatever. There was an interesting video that I saw by somebody who wanted to test their English listening, their native English speaker, by watching a couple of different movies and tracking every single thing they didn't hear perfectly. And they were sort of shocked by it was several hundred things that they would count up in like 4 hours of content, because we don't actually hear every single little thing. It just doesn't really bother us because we know that we're good at it and we know that we don't need it or whatever it is. And so there's also that, like, you're never going to get 100% of anything in any content ever. Like, that's just not really possible, because you will infer wrong things or different things, and that's fine. That's just how language is. Language is kind of wild and chaotic. But so hopefully that helps.
There's also a consequence of some changes in how movies and TV shows are made and the audio is mixed. There was a video on YouTube I saw recently where they were showing a contrast between how movies and sound used to be recorded on movies versus nowadays, and just how clear it used to be, and how they deliberately made it super clear because the audio quality wasn't great. Whereas nowadays the audio quality is really good, but that's led them to mix things in such a way that, and for people to speak in such a way that they're essentially mumbling and people can't understand it. And they have tons of examples of modern day movies where the audio is just not understandable by anyone. So that's also like you said, that is a consequence that we don't really pay attention to in our native language just because we're so used to it.